7 p.m. on Power 98.7.
1848 on Power Business. As promised, we are joined on the line by the SA Canegrowers Association. Now, we've spoken endlessly about the problems that were facing Tongaat Hewlett, and another mill, another sugar player, a player in the sugar sector rather, Glenhouse Sugar, has also gone into business rescue. This obviously having a terrible effect on cane growers, and we didn't want to have this conversation without the Cane Growers Association, rather, simply because they are bearing the brunt of the problems in the sector, and also the number of jobs and lives and livelihoods that depend on companies like Tongaat Hewlett doing well and performing is something that we continuously need to highlight. So joining us to have the conversation is Chairperson of the Association, Andrew Russell. Andrew, good evening. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, Noluthando. Kind of you to have interest in our distress.
Yes, Andrew, and I think maybe you could start off by speaking to us about Tongaat Hewlett. You and I have spoken before. At the time, you were rather optimistic about the ability for the company to turn itself around, in the business rescue process, and also negotiating with the business rescue practitioners to ensure that the cane growers are not negatively impacted by the process. How has that gone?
Well, it's good news that the business rescue practitioners closed off last season fairly well. They managed to acquire the necessary funding in order to do the off-crop maintenance of the sugar mills and the refinery, and they are in the process of opening their doors for the new milling season. So that's been very encouraging. What is less encouraging is the fact that the business rescue practitioners have chosen not to honor their industry obligations, and as such have put an enormous burden on the rest of the industry in order to meet those costs. And so while we're very comforted by the fact that the doors have opened and there's still somewhere for our growers to deliver their cane, we are very concerned about some of the business decisions that the business rescue practitioners have taken towards putting the Tongaat Hewlett business back on a stable footing.
Sandra, I do believe that along with the precarious nature of what's happening at Tongaat Hewlett, there's also the issue of a Glenhouse sugar mill. Speak to us about what's happening there, and how the cane growers' interests need to be highlighted there.
Yes. So the business distress that's happening at Glenhouse preceded Tongaat Hewlett going into business rescue. They had a number of adverse circumstances during the course of the last 2 years. They were badly affected by the unrest which happened in July 2021, and their mill was closed for a period of time as a consequence of that, and were unable to make sugar and therefore had nothing to sell. And then in April 2022, we had those devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal. Their factory was flooded. Their warehouse with sugar in was flooded, and it took them, they lost production time, and they also lost a large amount of stock. And now with Tongaat Hewlett going into business rescue and the rest of the industry having to pick up their industry obligations as a result of the business rescue practitioners not honoring that obligation, that's put a additional financial distress onto Glenhouse Sugar Mill, and as a consequence have had no other option other to declare themselves into the voluntary business rescue process.
So, and I do believe that at this point now there's a default aspect here for cane growers. Speak to us about that, the funds that are supposed to flow to yourselves and as an association, as members of your association, and why they haven't.
Well, the funds that you're talking about are levies that are collected from growers and from the millers, and each mill then pays that over to the South African Sugar Association. They use these levies to run the association. They pay to the grower association that portion of the levy that's been collected from their members. Now, what's happened with Tongaat Hewlett is that they have chosen not to honor those industry obligations, and so that flow of levies to SASA, the Sugar Association, and to the Grower Association has not happened. which has put an enormous amount of pressure on those organizations to be able to fund their operations. In addition to that, there is an industry obligation to all millers to pay through what is called a redistribution, which compensates those mills which export sugar on behalf of other mills. They usually export at a loss, and the exposure to that loss needs to be shared equally amongst all the millers. And the Tonga Hewlett business rescue practitioners have chosen not to pay over those funds as well. So as a consequence, the rest of the industry has had to honor those obligations, which has put enormous pressure on the mills and even more pressure on the growers who have had to make a contribution to make up that deficit.
At this point, Andrew, it's clear that it means that there's going to be a bulk of funds that basically exits the industry. You know, it won't flow in, it won't flow through because different players in the sector are trying to basically plug holes to ensure that those who play in the sector can survive. There are going to be financial losses. So to speak to us about these financial losses. But I also believe, Andrew, that, you know, there's an aspect here that is a violation of the Sugar Act. So speak to us also about that, and if then there is legal recourse here.
So the quantum of money we're talking about that has been withheld by the business rescue practitioners is in the order of 1.5 billion rand,
sure.
And 64% of that has had to be recovered from growers. So over 1 billion rand has had to be collected from the various, or every cane grower in order to make up that deficit. So it's a significant amount of money, and it's put an enormous burden on the rest of the industry. When we talk about the default that's occurred, the sugar industry legislation prescribes these levies. This legislation falls under the Sugar Act, an act of government, and as part of that act, the business rescue practitioners' perspective is that they have, under the Companies Act, they have the right to suspend certain liabilities, and they've chosen to suspend the payment of these levies and of the redistribution, which we believe to be a violation of the Sugar Act and its supporting legislation, the Sugar Industry Agreement. The recourse that we have is that we can go to the courts and ask for a declaratory order to ask them to assess whether what the business rescue practitioners are doing is legal or whether it's not, whether they have the right to suspend these levies in terms of the Companies Act. But unfortunately, that's a long, slow process, and we just don't have the time. So we have initiated that process has been initiated, but we can't rely on the outcome of that to rescue the situation. We need to be working in parallel with all the other stakeholders to find solutions to make sure, firstly, that the affected sugar mills and the refinery keep their doors open, that they have the necessary resources, capital, and human resources to keep those sugar operations going, and then secondly, to find other ways to convince the business rescue practitioners that what they're doing, in our view, is legally wrong, but in anyone's view is morally wrong, and they need to amend their practices. So we're working on that with the rest of the stakeholders. We also have approached government. Our industry legislation is under the auspices of the Department of Trade and Industry, and we've approached Minister Patel to assist us in this matter.
Yes, I'm keen to find out how those interactions with the minister have. Yes, I'm keen to find out how those interactions with the minister have gone, Andrew, considering how important the sugar industry is to the KZN economy, the survival of many families within KZN, and also, how maybe local government has stepped in, if at all. And, an important thing here, Andrew, that I'm also thinking about is that KZN saw the looting in 2021. It's seen the floods. And so it's already an economy that's under pressure. And so, the sugar sector not being able to thrive like it has in the past causes that to be a triple whammy for that economy.
Oh, yes, it really is. And the Department of Trade and Industry is very well aware of the fragile circumstances around the sugarcane value chain. In 2019, we began a process of designing a master plan under the auspices of the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Agriculture to design a new, sustainable, diversified, and vibrant future for the sugarcane industry. And we're 3 years into that plan, and we've seen some improvement in some areas, but there's still a long way to go, as we can see with the financial distress that the industry is still in, as evidenced by these mills going into business rescue. There's still a long road to travel. The Minister is very well aware of the circumstances, and what we are looking for is, concerted and urgent action to actually try to redress the situation and move us out of this abyss that we currently find ourselves in, because there is a bright future for the industry if we can get over these immediate circumstances.
And before I let you go, can you find out about the effects or the long-term effects that you're seeing after the introduction of sugar tax? Has this been as adverse as many players expected? And is this another headwind that the sector's having to find itself contending with?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the major factors that has impacted the South African sugar industry. As we know, in 2018, the Health Promotion Levy, also known as the sugar tax, was introduced, and research that was done by NEDLAC has evidence that there was 2 billion rands worth of revenue that was removed from the industry. There were 9,400 jobs that were lost in the growing sector alone. There was a huge drop in investment as a consequence of the tax. And so that tax has had an enormous impact on our industry, all of it negative. And unfortunately, there's been absolutely no evidence to show that the tax, the intended purpose of the tax, which was to reduce obesity, there's been no evidence that that has actually achieved its goals. So again, we're very relieved that the Minister of Finance has placed a moratorium on any increases in the tax. What we would like to see is that the tax be removed and we find more constructive and interventions, work with government to find interventions that do have the necessary outcomes in terms of improving the standard of health of our country, of our citizens, but doesn't have such an enormous, devastating negative impact on one of the primary industries and one of the few industries that is available to people in the deep rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and speaking to us about, these challenges, hoping that we can continue the conversation, especially as you continue to engage government, but as well as the other players in the sector to get some sort of reprieve for the cane growers.
Yes, we look forward to touching base with you again in future, and hopefully we'll be able to report some great progress in that regard. So thank you, Nolitando.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And that was Andrew Russell, chairperson for the SA Canegrowers Association. 7 p.m. Banda Zibonti is on standby with Power News.
Power News.